Knowing when and how to include accessible data tables in your Office documents is essential to be able to make Word and PowerPoint files that are accessible for everyone. It's easy to do, and you just need to take a few minutes to learn how we can get this done without any trade-offs. I'm David Berman, and today I'm demonstrating to you how to make tables in Word and PowerPoint accessible. The techniques I'm going to show today apply to Windows or Mac OS. They work in pretty well any version of Office, and although I'll be showing you how to do it in Word, the techniques are pretty much identical in PowerPoint. I'll describe as I go so that you can learn what you need just by listening or by reading the captions. Building tables in a way that's accessible for people living with disabilities is essential if you want them to be part of your overall effort to make your documents, make all your communications conform to accessibility standards, such as WCAG 2.0 or 2.1. The sample file I'm showing right now is not yet accessible. It's intentionally broken. So I've scrolled down to a table, and when we insert a table, we use we're creating a table from scratch, we would use the insert menu and then use the table command. Always use this way for creating a table. There's one other way to create a table using the draw table command. Just never use that. Always use the insert command to insert a table. And I have a table here called lot details. It's already got some data in it. Now, we're going to be doing two kinds of things to the table. One is we're going to do things that help people who can see the table be able to perceive the table better. And then the technical aspects we'll do to the table to make sure someone using assistive technology, such as a screen reader, are going to be changes that may not have an effect on what the table looks like, but will affect how the table behaves when someone's using assistive technologies. So let's start with the look of the table. Assuming you have the authority to change the look of the table, I find that this table is kind of hard to tell where it ends, or perhaps even how it's organized. So something we'll do right off the bat is to make the header row, which has the names of the columns in the table, more typographically different than the rest of the table. So although there was a background color behind this row, perhaps some people with limited vision wouldn't notice the gray tint behind there. What I've done is I've highlighted the first row and I've made it bold. So I'm making it clearer what part of the table is the headers, that is the column headers, and the rest of the table are rows of information. We tend to call this the headers and the data. So the header row is now visually more different than the data rows. But we're going to go further than that. So there's a control at the beginning of each table. It's a picture of 4 little arrows, and it says I'm a table, and I can go to the table properties. I can right click, use the context menu to choose the table properties menu, and it gives me power over the behavior and the look of the tables. I have 5 tabs. The other place I can control the table from is as soon as I'm in the table properties, 2 extra menus appear at the end of the list of menus in Word. One called Table Design, and another one called Layout. So we can use either approach to get to the commands we wish. So I want to add borders. I want to add lines around the cells of the table to make it easier to see where they are. So I'm going to choose Table Design, and then there's a command called Borders, and I'm going to simply choose the one called All Borders. And as I move my mouse, one can preview what the table will look like as I select the various choices. If I choose All Borders, I get a box around the entire table, plus between the columns and the rows. This makes it easier to see where one row begins and another ends. And so by making the headers and the data more typographically different from each other, as well as adding the borders, I've gone a long way to make it clear where the table begins and ends. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to help assistive technologies work better with the table. So also in this table design ribbon, which I selected earlier to get to the borders menu, there's also a series of checkboxes that are the first part of the ribbon. Under the part of the ribbon called Table Style Options, I have some checkboxes, and something that is essential that we must do for every data table is to check the header row checkbox. And what that does is it says this table has a header row. In other words, the first row of information in the table are the column headers. It's not just more data. And so by doing so, assistive technologies will know that the first row is the header row, the rest is the data. Now you may be wondering, what do I do if I have more than one header row? Or what if I have a table that's more complicated than just one row of column headers and a series of cells? Well, unfortunately, in Word, it's only possible to make a table accessible if the table is fairly simple. And the level of simplicity we need is that there are no merged cells and that there's only one header row. If we need to present data in more complexity than that, we either have to accept that our Word file will not be technically accessible, and so we'll have to provide another type of presentation of the data, such as, let's say, in a PDF file or in an HTML file, or we redesign our information in order to keep it to this level of simplicity. It's simply a limitation of Word, and there's no way to get around that at this time within Word itself. Now, the other thing we're going to do, because there's two things we have to do to make sure the table is accessible for assistive technologies. One was making sure the header row checkbox was checked. And the other is that in the table properties of the table, we're going to designate that the rows, and we can do this either in the table properties in the row tab, or we could do it in the layout ribbon. I find it easier to get here, table properties, row tab. There's a checkbox called repeat as header row at the top of each page. Now, this kind of seems odd because this checkbox sounds like it's about making sure that if a table was so long that it went over more than one page, that the header row will repeat at the top of each page. And indeed, it will do that for you if the table is enormous. But oddly, it's the truth that this is also a checkbox we need to check in order for assistive technologies to recognize that the table has a header row. So we just do that even though it doesn't sound completely sensible. And I'm selecting OK to change that table, to close that table properties box. Now we should also typically insert a caption. It's important that a table has a caption so that we know what it's about. And then we can also optionally add what's called a table summary. Now, a table summary is like alt text for a table. Just like in other lessons, we've learned that every photo or image in a document requires alternative text in order to describe what it is to those who can't perceive the image. So, for example, we have a photo of a cat. We have alt text that says photo of cat. Well, in a table, if a table is very complex, and this table is pretty simple, so arguably it wouldn't be necessary. We usually hold off on table summaries unless a table has at least 5 rows or 5 columns and 5 columns. However, I have this optional thing I can do where within the table properties, you'll see that you'll discover an alt text tab, and that alt text tab looks just like the alternative text tab we've seen for images. There's a title field and a description field, and just like for images, we ignore the title field and we put all alternative text in the description field. So what do we mean for alternative text for a table? Well, the idea is to describe the table so that someone, for example, who can't see, who's using a screen reader, can know what the table is about and how it's organized without having to explore all the text in it to discover that for themselves. So for example, in this case, I could say this is a table organized by lot provision. I'm going to say this is a table of lot details with columns C1 lot provisions required and provided with rows for each attribute of the lot. And so then someone who understands the document but needs to know what's in this particular table can use their screen reader, and their screen reader will announce to them as they arrive at the table what the table is all about, and then they can decide if they want to explore the table or not. So there we have it. We've learned how to make a table more accessible for people who can see it, as well as people who are using screen readers who are non-visual to perceive the table. So one other thing I want to mention though, tables are meant for data. And sometimes we'll experience people using tables in situations where a table wasn't necessary. So I want to encourage you to only use tables when a table is the right way to do it. So think about tables as useful when we have an X versus Y grid of information. And if we're using tables for other purposes, for example, I'm going to scroll down here. Here's a case, for example, I'm showing two headings where someone wanted to get an arrangement of all caps, white type on a blue rectangle or colored rectangle. And in this first case, the one called consideration for orders, there's a table properties object coming up because they've used tables to get this arrangement of words with a rectangle behind it. This is not a good use for tables. Let's only keep tables for data. And I'm demonstrating here that we can get the exact same visual presentation using other techniques such as shading and a first line indent. So we can always get the look we want in a proper way using Word rather than relying on tables to do what we call a layout table. A layout table is when someone's trying to get a layout, a look, an arrangement of things on the page that it actually isn't data. I'm going to scroll down a little bit further. Here's another case where someone has taken some information and wisely used tabs, for example, to arrange information in a way where and cleverly avoided using a table. Or here's a list of information that's parties to the agreement. Someone's cleverly used columns. So the information's in the logically correct order. I'm demonstrating that by using my arrow to move from the first column of information to the second. And if we add more information, the columns will split correctly. This is an example of how we're using structures like columns, lists in a way that's accessible rather than wrongly using a table when a table is not necessary or appropriate. So there you have it. We can create at least simple data tables fully accessibly with no trade-offs in Word and the exact same techniques in PowerPoint whether we're working on Mac or OS, and that's the end of our lesson. So, hey, there's nothing we can't make accessible. And if you want to go deeper on accessible tables or anything else, ask questions or contact us at wcag2.com. We love to teach, we love to share, and we'll go as deep as you need. See you next time.